My name is Charles Malky, biologist and plant expert with Ivory Organics, where we grow cool plants. And today I have the privilege and the honor of presenting in front of about 30 to 40 members of what's called the California Rare Fruit Growers. Check this out. This is one of their magazines right here from the California Rare Fruit Growers. And they've just recently added a YouTube link where they're going to be doing a lot more educational videos from the website. But in this presentation, I'm going to be talking about the importance of the use of Ivory Organics, as well as talking about plant evolution, native plants, fertilizers, propagation, both sexual as well as asexual propagation, and just talking about some of the pros and cons of some of these methods for propagating plants. I hope you enjoy this video. The next topic I want to get into is plant propagation. This is where it gets into, I guess, rated G. Or whatever it would be called. We're going to talk about sexual versus asexual propagation. The concept of genetics started off with Mendel, the Mendel peas in 1965. After 8 years of taking red peas, do any of you firstly know the Mendel pea story? Do you guys remember from high school, college? Or you guys still read about it? But what Mendel did was he took his white peas and his red peas and crossed them, and it made pink peas. And then he took his pink peas and crossed them together, and it made one white pea and one red pea and more pink peas. And I'm just talking just generally. But what he learned was that there's genetics that when they combine with one another create a different generation of plants. And he studied, the dominant genes that control color, and then other dominant genes that control height, and basically, combine plants to create different plants after that. So Mendel's considered the father of genetics. We're going to get more into it in just a second. And then Walter Sutton and Theodore Boveri, they came up with the chromosome theory of inheritance in 1902. So just a little over 100 years ago. Flower anatomy basics. The flower, and I got a couple examples here. So this morning, between 7 and 8 o'clock, in addition to all this other stuff, I was in my garden removing some flowers off my citrus plants, which I know is a no-no. But what I wanted to share here, and before I pass it out, the flower in general has the petals on the outside, which, it's closed until it's time to bloom, and then the petals open up, and then within it, you'll see these filaments, which are the stamens, which is considered like the male part, and on the tip of the stamens is the pollen, which is the male sex part of the plant, is the pollen. Within the middle of it is the pistil, which rests in the middle, and the pistil is typically sticky on the end, and you'll see these with the flowers that I passed. If you want to open the bags and touch the pistil, it's typically sticky and moist to capture the pollen when the insects travel from collecting pollen from the stamen ends and then crossing over the pistil. The pollen then touches the pistil, and the pollen part, the male part, will then enter the pistil and work its way down to the ovary, and that's where fertilization occurs. And then you create these seeds, which are the combined genetics of the male pollen and the female ovary. And together, that creates the next generation. So the example would be, and we're going to talk a lot more about avocados, when you open that avocado and you get to the seed, and we're dealing with, let's say, a Hass avocado. You bought it from the store and you want more Hass avocados. If you plant the seed, do you have a Hass avocado?
No,
absolutely not. And then the answer is absolutely not. A lot of people write me several times a week saying, I planted these seeds, and I love the fruit so much that I planted this seed, and I expect to have more Hass avocados. I'm like, it's no longer a Hass avocado. Whatever your last name is, it's that avocado. It's no longer a Hass because it's the combined genetics of a male and a female part that created a different child, just like we're the children of our parents, and if we have kids at home, they're all totally different. Hopefully they're somewhat related, but they're different. So that's that. What I want to share with you here is the perfect flower, as it's defined. It's also known as hermaphroditic flower, is a flower that has both male and female parts. When you look at the plant, you expect to see the ovary in the middle surrounded by the stamen with the pollen around it. And this here is the perfect flower. I wrote on here, perfect flower, citrus flower. Feel free if you want to open it up, if you want to kind of touch the pistil and see, how that's sticking, how that works. What you'll also find if you take a little while and look at your citruses, you'll find sometimes an all male flower. And these flowers have no pistil. It's just the stamens with pollen on the end. And again, when the bees come to pollinate it, it'll pick up the pollen and then take it to a female flower or a perfect flower and then pollinate it there. So this here is a male flower which I got from a Lisbon as well as a Meyer lemon tree this morning. And then and the male flowers you'll probably see on average about 5% of the time. On your squash plants you'll see it all the time. Your squash plants you'll have your male flowers, but then your female flower you'll see that little zucchini behind the flower. That's your perfect flower because it has both the male and the female parts happening on that one plant. But then you also have your male flowers there to help facilitate pollination as well. The last one here is an all female flower, and this was hard to find. I found it on a ruby red grapefruit, and last week I saw it on my Oro Blanco grapefruit, but those are just done blooming. But your all female flowers will have no stamens and no pollen on it. It's just an ovary. So the petals are gonna pull back, and it's just a little fruit in the middle. And you'll see that with the all female flower. But again, these are all, so those are the flowers you'll see in your garden. And now we'll talk about the avocado flower. If you turn the page here to this chart, your avocados are typically broken down into two parts. There's a type A avocado and a type B avocado. Your type A avocados, I haven't got them all memorized, but I always think Haas. I know Haas for sure is A, and I know Pinkerton is also an A because I got both of those in my property. And then my B type avocado would be my Fuerte, for example. And I know Beta is another one. And I know there's a list of within your nursery, there's at least 10 choices on both sides when you pick up an A or a B. But what's unique about the avocado flower, which I did a YouTube video on where I zoom in the flower and we see the insects pollinating it and we talk about the breakdown, is this. The Haas avocado, not just the Haas, the avocado in general will typically open on the first day as one sex. So if you take a look at your chart on day one, your Haas avocado, which is your type A, will open up in the morning as a female, but by the afternoon, the female function closes. You cannot pollinate the female part of the flower. Whereas with the type B, the female part of the flower is only available in the afternoon and not the morning. On day two of the same flower, it opens up again. And now on your type A flower, it's only in the afternoon will the male function be available, the pollen for pollination. But with a type B flower, it's only it's male in the morning of day two. Another way to explain it, and we're just going to go across the chart on type A. So we're going to imagine you got your Haas avocado in your backyard. Day one, the flower opens and it's female. Day two, the flower opens and it's male. If you're and it only makes more sense once you get to day two. Now at day two, you're going to have some flowers opening that are day one flowers, right? So now we got male and female functions happening on the plant on the same day. And now on day two, let's say I'm that honeybee. And actually, the number one pollinators I found on my avocados were flies, and there's another one called the hoverfly. I saw a lot of those spending a lot of time on the flowers this last week. But day two, it's a male in the afternoon. So the bees visit the flower, pollinate it, take off, and go to sleep at their hive. It's not until the next morning that it can come back to the plant and then pollinate that flower to then create the fertilization necessary to create the seed and ultimately the fruit. Craziest thing, evolutionary, as to why would this even happen, where the plant would risk creating this pollen, insect's going to pollinate it, take off and never come back. How is it ever going to get its pollen? And just to let you know, when it comes to type A and type B avocados, they are at least
80 to 90+% successful as just one plant. You don't need an A and a B in order to have successful avocado production. It's by having both that you'll get an extra 5, and some research says 20% more avocados per tree because of the availability of more pollen to the flowers. But I think the concept of the flower taking that much risk in regards to compromising its ability for accomplishing fertilization, I think is crazy. Does anybody want to share an idea as to why it would do such a crazy system? Yeah.
Diversity get pollinated from it to bring the tree.
I'm glad you said it. So from the 8,000 people that saw me on YouTube, and I got about a couple dozen comments, there was one person, I'm going to read his comment, but it's exactly what you said. This guy, his name on YouTube is 2hopes5, and he wrote, I guess the incompatibility evolved as a way to prevent inbreeding, which would have weakened the species. Having A-B type makes it more likely for a plant to be pollinated by a more distant relative, even if lots of close relatives were growing nearby. The idea is that by not accepting pollen, like for example, the flowers that I just shared with you on the citrus, for example, where it's got the male part and the female part right there, it's just going to be pollinating with itself. And for genetic diversity, as you said, it's off the same flower that it's going to end up pollinating itself, and it's not really reaching out to what is around it. By closing its ability to pollinate its own flower, it's forcing pollination between other trees that may be in the area. And by increasing genetic diversity, the logic behind it is by as different as our kids are, like for example, let's say I'm Hawaiian in this example and my spouse is Swedish, which she is. By mixing our genetics together and making kids, the goal is that when the environment changes, whether it be a cold or a flu or the weather or the temperature or something, the goal is hopefully our children will better be able to tolerate the changes in conditions better than if we were all Hawaiian bred and then having to deal with snow year round versus, you know, if we're all Swedish bred. But by mixing, hopefully we have the ability to cope with extremes better, or not. But that's what genetic diversity will do, and the ones that survive will be the ones that will perpetuate the genetics of that plant and the success of that plant. Does that all make sense? I know it's a tricky idea, and I know you'll never hear this at most of your plant lectures, but I wanted to give you a little taste of genetics and what's going on. Yes, Brice?
On the reverse of that argument, we have, and I'll use citrus since you seem to enjoy citrus, in California, they filed a lawsuit against beekeepers because bees were cross-pollinating their seedless citrus. And when you cross-pollinate pollen from a seeded citrus to a seedless citrus, your seedless citrus starts to develop seeds.
Yeah.
So, no, either way.
No, that's a good point. That's true. If we go down the chart, we are like where it says the seed equals the children of the parent. Are they identical to the parent? The answer is like with 90+%. Your seeds are different typically than the parent. And then for maturity to fruit, the drawback for planting seeds is, for example, citrus or avocado or most fruit trees, if you plant a seed, it generally takes 7 to 10 years for it to become mature enough to then ultimately support fruit. So for those people that are planting that avocado seed saying, one day I'm going to enjoy Haas avocados, I'm like, you're going to have to wait a decade versus, and you don't even know what you're going to get, compared to if you graft it with a known variety. I'm like, still plant the seed, but graft it with something you know performs well, and then that way, within the next year, possibly 3 years, you'll enjoy good fruit. Chromosomes versus genes. Humans, it's already on here. So humans have 46 chromosomes. Our sex cells have half of that. It's 23 plus 23 together, the egg and the sperm together make the 46 chromosomes necessary to create a human. Corn has 2 sets of 10. The male and the female, 10 plus 10 makes 20 chromosomes. Avocados, 12 times 2. Roses could be 7 times 2 times 3 or times 4. Bananas in the wild are generally seedy and have 2 sets of 11, so 22 chromosomes. but the bananas that we eat are triploid, meaning 3 sets of chromosomes, and that's what leads to the infertility of the banana fruit. If you take a look inside of the banana, you might see those little black dots in there. Those are all the plant attempting to create a seed, but it just doesn't become because of the 3 sets of genetics that the banana has. And more of those are made just because they're infertile. You can't make more of the edible bananas from seed. You would take one of their pups or their suckers from the base and then propagate more of those that way. And I wrote an example, a donkey. A donkey plus a horse. Donkey has 62 chromosomes, horse 64. When you mix these 2 together, you make a mule that can no longer propagate. Again, it's because you create an odd set of chromosomes within the plant. And there's people as well that have occasionally an extra sex cell, creating that odd number, which leads to infertility within people too. So this phenomenon crosses throughout the entire living system. The perfect flower we just talked about being, the perfect flower has both male and female parts in it. We saw the differences even among citrus, that it could be also all male and all female on the same plant. And then monoembryonic versus polyembryonic seeds. The monoembryonic seeds are the ones that you'd expect. Male and female parts come together and create the seed, which then grows and sprouts and creates the new plant. The polyembryonic seeds, on the other hand, could still start with fertilization between male and female parts. But what typically happens is the seed will then create many shoots. And it's typically the one that's fertile that won't develop properly, whereas the competition suckers that grow out of that same seed are from the somatic cells, which the somatic are the cells of the parent plant that are genetically identical within the seed. Those just somehow randomly start growing too, in addition to the fertilized stem. But the somatic, or the parent cells that are within that seed, dominate. They're typically more vigorous, and then thereby creating an identical plant.
A spore, is it?
A spore?
Spore.
When I hear spores, I'm thinking about like ferns, right? Like those types of spores.
A spore.
Oh, a sport.
Oh, he means an offshoot, like not a spore. But
So a spore, like we discussed like suckers and stuff. I consider a spore more of like a sucker phenomenon, where it's coming off the, if it's not a grafted plant, you know, it'll be a genetically identical plant to the parent. And you can, like for example, this apple mess that's over here is an apple tree I've been propagating since I was 10 or 11 years old. Out of my mom had an apple tree in the backyard that was 8 feet tall, but it would continuously make these suckers at the base. I've been using these suckers, and this used to be 1 and now it's 6 more. But I use them to basically graft dwarf any variety of apple onto it. So the sport would be, it basically created a runner or a sucker off the base. So when it comes to polyembryonic, this is a genetically identical seed plant to the parent plant. And the examples would include mangoes, the Kensington, the Bowen mangoes. It's a common phenomenon within those 2 types of mangoes. The Valencia orange, your Lisbon lemon, your Thompson or Marsh grapefruit. Notice how I keep talking about citrus. But there's even some varieties of peach that have this phenomenon as well in them as well. And then when I talked about the banana and the seeds that are in there that don't develop into seeds because of the odd number of chromosomes, on there I have in bold and underlined as parthenocarpy, which is the phenomenon where there's seeds in there but they're not developing. It's the same concept that's also in your seedless watermelons, even within some oranges that are seedless. Sometimes you'll see a shell of a seed, but it just doesn't develop again due to this phenomenon. And it's sometimes created without fertilization as well. And that's why I wrote the word virgin fruit, where the fruit can also develop without the fertilization of the, coming from the pollen. Propagation now. We learned that by planting seeds, you create diversity. And that's the way of propagating plants by sexual reproduction. But then there's also asexual reproduction, which includes everything else on the list. Your cuttings, grafting, air layering, and then taking the suckers and daughters and runners from like your strawberries and your bananas and your birds of paradise. The examples I brought here today are these. For cuttings, I have in here, and examples of like things you can cut include your roses, your grapes, your fig trees are very easy to propagate by way of cutting. And in here I have two examples of cuttings. One I wrote good cutting and one I wrote bad cutting. The difference between the two is where you actually cut that, make that prune as close as possible to a node. Wherever that node is, you want to cut on either end of it by at least 1/4 of an inch and not leave more because it's going to result in dead wood, but about 1/4 inch away from the node. And then for the cuttings that you're going to put in the ground, the bottom part of it, you'll also score the bottom tip to increase surface area for more water absorption as well as root formation. But these two, if you want to pass these together, you can see the differences that I created this morning as well between good and bad. The other example I wanted to share is grafting. And this here is, obviously for example purposes, I'm not even going to tell you what I grafted together because it wouldn't work. I'll tell you what I did. It's a fig on the bottom and a hibiscus on the top. So it's not going to happen. But I want to share with you an idea of cleft grafting, and here's that. With my technique, and most of us, that are learning it and learning from the experts will typically use a grafting tape or parafilm and all these other materials. I would like, while I continue to explain, is to have a volunteer that helps me open up some of these grafts over here. I've got some scissors. Does anybody have the time to help me open it so as you guys leave you can see some of these grafts that I've started about 6 weeks ago? Is there a volunteer? Anybody? Are you going to make me do it? You'll help me? Thank you. So I've got some scissors here. Oh, me too.
What do you want me to do?
If you can just open this up,
I mean, cut it.
cut it open, and then that one, those two. So the example with the grafting bag I'm passing around shows cleft grafting, which when you can't get the two plants close enough together to graft, like for example, even if you've got a small bucket of one variety of plant in here, you can sometimes mount the plant within the parent tree and have them graft together, which is my preferred way of grafting. Is called the approach grafting style. The two examples that I have here, one of them is called the cleft graft, and on it I grafted a Granny Smith apple onto my dwarf rootstock. The Granny Smith, on the other hand, originally came from an M11, which is a like standard size rootstock for apple, and the M11 created I'm going to use your word, a sport, and I took that root and then am now using the M11 to graft it onto another variety of apple I've been growing for also 15 years, and I don't know the name of it, but it's been a family favorite, and we're just propagating that too. So those are the two examples that we have here. So again, the cleft graft typically works best if you can't get the two trees close enough to accomplish by approach grafting. And the cleft graft you usually want to do as close as possible to just before it breaking dormancy. And you'll see what that looks like in here. The approach graft, on the other hand, when can you do that method? Any ideas? Approach grafting? Anytime. I graft any time of the year. By approach grafting, what you're doing is you're taking two parts of the plants together, and you'll see how I did it over here. I cut into whatever's going to end up being the rootstock. I cut down into, and whatever's going to be the scion wood, I'll cut up into, the idea being that just by gravity, and it's not even necessary to do this, but I'm adding the idea that by gravity, I want the upper part to rest on top of the rootstock so that the weight is shifted that way. If I did it the other way, it would be as if the scion wood's going to fall off, but it won't even if you get it backwards. So you'll see those two examples. Thank you.
Just like a little string around here. Do you want me to take
No, we'll leave the string on. So the other thing too, when it comes to grafting, and here's a personal technique I've used. I generally use fishing string. I like to look at my grafts after a few weeks to see how they're healing. On average, it takes about 6 to 8 weeks for the cambium tissues. With the grafting bag that I passed around, the goal on it is, you'll see that the larger, thicker, what's going to be the rootstock of the plant is bigger than the soundwood, which is smaller. If you can't align the two parts perfectly, all you have to do is make sure that the cambium tissues, which are right underneath the bark, are in line with the cambium tissues from the rootstock, and the two will eventually heal together as one and callus over and then support the above wood. So grafting. The concept of grafting was the first thing that got me hooked on plants. I was 11 or 12 years old, and after that, like, I took over the entire property. I'm like, nobody touches anything on this land at whatever house I've ever lived on since. And grafting, I remember my dad saying, you know, do you think it's a miracle? Do any of you guys think grafting's a miracle, or like no big deal? Everybody does it every day. I see it as a miracle. If you don't think like putting in somebody else's heart in somebody else's chest, and that could be a miracle, why can't grafting be a miracle too? And it doesn't always work. It takes practice. It took me 3 years. So I was 10, 11. By the time I was 12, I finally got it down. And my peach tree, I was able to successfully grow almonds and cherries and plums and apricots. And I had all of those things by the time I was in 9th grade. And that's kind of what established me within my family and church community and everything. Like, that guy's the plant man. Like, he can do things that nobody does. But grafting is like so much fun. And the cool thing is you can do it now even if your plants are growing through the approach grafting method, which you'll see over here. And both of them have already healed over. Like, you'll see what it's like. And now it's just a matter of the cleft graft is done. Eventually, when I see that string's strangling it. And here's a couple of techniques that I use for grafting. Again, I typically use fishing twine, which is, I've never heard of anybody doing that. But again, my goal is I want to see the graft while it's still being bound. And secondly, I wrap my grafts in napkins or paper towels or whatever else. The number one reason most grafts fail is because it dries out, desiccation. If that's the number one reason that they fail, and I remember reading this again, this is 7th and 8th grade, then I'm like, you know what, I'm going to wrap it and make sure it stays moist. And you'll notice that with some of these grafts that there's even roots coming out of it. Like, it just really wants to grow because it's warm and it's moist and it's not, you know, soaking wet. But it's growing in all these different directions. But the graft tissues have since healed over, and you'll see how they've calloused. And now I'll actually take a product such as the Ivory Organics and coat all of those exposed openings, if there are any, which there'll typically be a couple cracks here and there, just to seal it to prevent, again, beetles or termites or anything else from entering and nesting within some of the dead tissue areas until it eventually heals over, which will take a few more months. So that's grafting. One other thing I want to share with the last 2 minutes I've got is there's pluses and minuses to everything that you do with all of these propagation methods that I've listed down below. Seeds, for example, create genetic diversity, unless it's a Lisbon lemon seed or whatever else. And then the delay with planting a seed is you got to wait 7+ years for it to get mature enough. So seeds is timing, and also diversification is one thing. Cuttings, most people will say cuttings don't eventually grow into successful plants because it's lacking a taproot. I'm of the belief that it just takes an extra year or two, and eventually the root system will be just as strong, if not stronger, than some of these plants with taproots. But some people say you cannot have a successful plant from cutting, and it's the only way I've been propagating my figs. When it comes to figs, and even though some people say you can't grow a fig from seed, have any of you seen little fig seedlings on your property? So those are also parthenocarpic fruits, are your figs. Figs, most people say, are seedless. Like, how do you possibly have, you know, seedlings growing from your figs? I'm like, I've got them all over my property. So unless I'm growing the only one, but I see it everywhere as well. But that's another thing that some people comment saying, you know, figs don't have seeds. I'm like, well, then maybe it has one instead of 1,000, even though it looks like there's 1,000 seeds in there. Most of them are undeveloped seeds, and that's the reason people have propagated them by way of cutting. You're making genetically identical quality figs rather than, again, planting a seed, waiting that 5, 10+ years to then get a mystery fruit that's not even taste good, and now you got to do whatever, dispose of the tree however you decide. So cuttings, grafting. If you graft a plant, I mean, the benefits of grafting are numerous. One, your goal is to have a root stock that'll support the fruit as either a dwarf, a semi-dwarf, or a standard. So you're controlling the size of the plant. You're also controlling disease resistance that's specific to your area. If you're getting it from a quality grower that grows trees in your area, they'll know what rootstock is best and most compatible for your area. I know one of the issues when it comes to plant brokers is they'll sometimes buy trees from the East Coast and then sell them to the West Coast. And that sometimes has disastrous results because they've grafted on a rootstock that's specific for freezing conditions and dealing with soil conditions that are on the East Coast and not specific to us here on the West Coast. East Coast Florida, sandy soil versus our clay soil. There's specific rootstocks that'll enable you to grow the exact same identical fruit as the East Coast or Florida and California, but you just put it on the right rootstock that's most compatible for success here. So that's the power of grafting. But if you graft, and your goal is, let's say I want a standard tree, so you got a standard rootstock, and you graft onto it, you'll never have the exact same height as a standard fruit tree when it's grafted, as if you were to take a cutting and allow that to become a standard tree on its own root. The reason is the graft union also impedes a little bit or takes away a little bit from its vigor and its ability to reach the maximum height if the goal is to have the biggest, most gigantic tree possible. If you're grafting it, you'll gain more if it's still going to be a big tree as a cutting. Other things, air layering is another great way to make plants all the way starting spring, summer, and fall. Air layerings work very well on dicots, and I'm not going to go into the science of that real quick. But most of all of your fruit trees are dicot species. So your avocados, your citrus, if you want to throw some examples at me, your papayas, your mangoes, all of those you can do air layers all the way from whenever the plant is most active, which is spring, summer, and early fall. You can do air layering, and I've got videos on YouTube where you can check those out to see how I've done it, and you can see the before and afters. Monocots are like your palm trees. Wouldn't work, but sugarcane, it would work. So I mean, there's exceptions also within the monocot family where you can also use air layering. But these are just other ideas on things you can be doing in your garden, and I think I've shared 101 ideas, and I know my time's up.
I certainly learned a few things. I hope some of you in the audience did too.
Thank you.
I'm sure Charles will be around for a little while to answer additional questions for you. And we're also looking for next month for a field trip. If somebody has a garden that we haven't seen and would like to share it with the group, please contact me either here or through the website. And let's see what else. And again, we're looking for volunteers. We're looking for people that can assist us in keeping our organization strong and moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Bruce.
Nice job. So that was your first lecture of this time?
Well, with you guys.
Now you don't have problems with loss of moisture using your
You
don't
wanna
use
get this real quick.
parafilm or anything else?
No. I just, as you saw, I
saw the fishing wire.
I just had it wrapped in, I don't know where it went with the packaging, but it's right here.
Oh, so it's like
But
air
this is
layer.
it.
So if you've enjoyed this educational video by Ivory Organics, be sure to like it, and most importantly, by subscribing below, you'll be connected to all of these other educational videos. Thanks again for watching. Happy gardening.